There is a specific number that, once reached, changes something fundamental about how a person experiences their own financial life. It is not a large number. It is not the number that separates the poor from the wealthy in any meaningful economic sense. It will not buy a house, fund a business at scale, or change a person's social class, but $1,000 saved, genuinely saved, sitting untouched, separate from daily spending, does something that no larger, future amount can replicate. It proves, for the first time in concrete and undeniable terms, that the cycle can actually be broken. That saving is not a theoretical exercise reserved for people with more income. That the system works for this specific person, with this specific income, in this specific set of circumstances. This proof matters enormously, because the single biggest reason people abandon saving systems before they produce meaningful results is not lack of discipline. It is lack of belief that the system will actually work for them specifically. The first $1,000 is the evidence that ends that doubt permanently. Dangote's first real capital was not large by any objective measure. The $3,000 he borrowed from his uncle to begin trading would not be considered substantial capital by any modern business standard. But it was real, it was his, and it proved something to him that no amount of advice or encouragement from others could have proven as effectively. That disciplined accumulation, applied consistently, produces results. Today, I'm going to give you the exact roadmap from zero to your first 1,000 saved, not vague encouragement. A specific month-by-month plan with concrete numbers, concrete obstacles you will face at each stage, and concrete solutions for each obstacle. Why $1,000 is the right first target. Before the roadmap itself, I want to explain why this specific number matters, because understanding the psychology behind the target makes the entire journey easier to sustain. Research on goal setting and motivation consistently shows that distant, abstract goals are far less motivating than near-term, concrete milestones. Telling yourself you are saving toward eventual financial freedom, or eventual wealth, or an eventual better life provides almost no psychological traction in the difficult early months, when progress feels slow and the sacrifice feels real. A specific number, $1,000, provides something an abstract goal cannot. It provides a finish line that is close enough to feel achievable, within a realistic time frame, while being significant enough to represent genuine progress, rather than a trivial amount that provides little sense of accomplishment. There is also a specific financial significance to this number that goes beyond psychology. 1,000, for most people across African income levels, represents roughly 1 to 3 months of essential living expenses if managed carefully. This means that reaching this target does not just provide psychological proof that saving works. It provides genuine, practical financial resilience, the ability to absorb a moderate emergency, a temporary income disruption, or an unexpected expense without being forced back into desperate financial decisions. This is precisely the foundation Dangote built his entire trading career upon. Before any factory, before any large-scale operation, there was a period of accumulating enough capital to provide a buffer against the inevitable disruptions that come with any business activity. The first meaningful amount of saved capital is not the wealth itself. It is the foundation that makes pursuing larger wealth possible without the constant fear that one disruption will erase everything. The roadmap, month by month. Let me give you the specific path, broken into distinct phases, each with its own primary challenge and specific solution. Months 1 and 2 in establishing the mechanism. The primary goal in these first 2 months is not accumulating a large amount. It is establishing, with absolute consistency, the mechanical process of pre-allocation that we discussed in the previous video, moving a fixed percentage of income into a separate account the moment that income arrives, before any other spending occurs. If your income arrives monthly, this means the percentage moves on the day of payment, not at some point afterward when you remember to do it. If your income arrives more irregularly, common for traders, freelancers, and small business owners, this means the percentage moves immediately upon receipt of each payment, regardless of how small or irregular. The specific percentage at this stage matters less than the consistency of execution. If 10% feels sustainable, begin there. If your circumstances genuinely only allow 5%, without compromising essential needs, begin there instead. The primary failure mode in these first 2 months is not insufficient ambition in the percentage chosen. It is inconsistency in execution, moving the money some months and not others, depending on how the month happened to unfold. By the end of month 2, you should have a small amount saved, perhaps $40, perhaps $80, depending on your income and chosen percentage. The absolute amount is far less important at this stage than the fact that the mechanism has now operated twice without interruption. This proves the mechanism itself is functional. Before you attempt to optimize or accelerate it, the specific obstacle most people encounter in these first 2 months is a sense that the amount being saved is too small to matter, which creates psychological pressure to abandon the system in favor of simply spending the money on something that feels more immediately meaningful. The solution to this specific obstacle is reframing the goal of these 2 months correctly. You are not trying to save a meaningful amount yet. You are trying to prove the mechanism works. The amount is almost irrelevant at this stage. The proof of consistent execution is the actual objective. Months 3 and 4, increasing the percentage. Once the mechanism has operated successfully for 2 consecutive months, the second phase begins. This phase involves a deliberate, modest increase in the percentage being saved. Now that the basic mechanism has been proven functional, the specific increase should be modest enough to remain sustainable without creating the kind of financial strain that leads to abandoning the system entirely. A reasonable approach is increasing the percentage by no more than 3 to 5 percentage points from your starting point, moving from 10% to perhaps 13 or 15%, for example. This specific phase often coincides with the first real test of the obligation boundaries discussed previously. As the saved amount becomes visible, even if still modest, family members or community members may become aware of it, and requests for access to this growing resource frequently emerge at exactly this point. This is the specific moment where the boundaries established in the previous system become critical. The amount saved in months 3 and 4 is precisely the amount most vulnerable to being redirected toward an emerging request that feels urgent and difficult to refuse. The specific solution here is having decided in advance exactly how requests for access to this growing savings will be handled, ideally before any specific request actually arrives, so the response comes from a predetermined principle rather than an in-the-moment negotiation under social pressure. A useful specific rule at this stage is that savings designated for this $1,000 target are not available for redistribution until the target is reached, with any genuine emergencies addressed through other means rather than through this specific accumulating fund. By the end of month 4, with a slightly increased percentage now being saved consistently, the accumulated total should be meaningfully larger than the month 2 total, perhaps in the range of $150 to $250, depending on income level and the specific percentages chosen. Months 5 and 6, introducing a secondary stream. This phase introduces something beyond simply allocating a percentage of existing income. It introduces the concept of directing any additional, irregular income specifically toward the savings target, separate from the regular percentage already being saved from primary income. This might include income from the second income strategies discussed previously, a small trading margin, a service payment, a rental income from an underutilized asset. It might include any unexpected income, a gift, a bonus, a one-time payment for occasional work. The specific principle at this stage is that any income arriving outside the normal, expected flow gets directed disproportionately toward the savings target, rather than being absorbed into regular spending simply because it feels like unexpected, extra money that is psychologically easier to spend without consideration. This specific behavior, directing irregular income towards savings rather than spending, produces a disproportionate acceleration effect, because irregular income, while unpredictable in timing, is often larger in individual amount than the regular percentage being saved from primary income. A single piece of irregular income directed entirely toward the savings target can advance the timeline more than an entire month of the regular percentage allocation. The specific obstacle at this stage is the psychological tendency to treat irregular income as fundamentally different from regular income, as money that exists outside the normal financial system and is therefore available for discretionary spending without the same consideration applied to regular income. The solution is treating all income, regardless of source or regularity, according to the same predetermined allocation principles established from the beginning. By the end of month 6, with the combination of an increased percentage from regular income and disciplined direction of irregular income toward the target, the accumulated total should represent meaningful progress potentially in the range of $350 to $500, depending on the specific circumstances, placing you roughly at the halfway point of the overall target. Months 7 and 8, the resistance phase. This is the phase where most people who abandon saving systems entirely typically do so, and understanding why in advance significantly increases the likelihood of pushing through successfully. By this point, the initial motivation and novelty of the system have faded. The amount saved, while meaningful, has not yet reached a level that feels transformative or exciting. The daily sacrifice required to maintain the percentage allocation has become routine rather than novel, which paradoxically makes it easier to rationalize. Occasional exceptions, a withdrawal here, a skipped allocation there, justified by some specific circumstance that feels reasonable in the moment. This is precisely the phase where the visible milestone system discussed in the previous video becomes most critical. If specific milestones were established and marked at $100, $200, $300, this is the phase where reaching $400 and approaching $500 should be explicitly acknowledged and recognized, specifically to counter the motivational fatigue that naturally occurs at this stage of any sustained discipline. The specific obstacle in months 7 and 8 is what might be called mid-journey fatigue, the psychological experience of having put in significant sustained effort without yet reaching the satisfying conclusion of the overall goal. This is a well-documented phenomenon across many forms of sustained discipline, from physical fitness goals to financial accumulation, and it is not a sign of personal weakness. It is a predictable phase that occurs in almost any sustained effort toward a meaningful goal. The specific solution is anticipating this phase before it arrives, and having a specific plan for navigating it rather than being surprised by it. This might include a specific reward plan for reaching the halfway milestone, not a reward that draws from the savings itself, but a separate, modest acknowledgement that provides motivational reinforcement at exactly the point where motivation naturally tends to dip. Months 9 and 10, acceleration. By this point in the journey, several factors typically combine to accelerate progress beyond the rate established in earlier months. The percentage allocation, increased in months 3 and 4, has now been operating consistently for 5 to 6 months and has become a genuinely automatic habit, rather than a conscious effort requiring ongoing willpower. The combination of regular percentage savings and irregular income direction has likely produced at least 1 or 2 instances of the acceleration effect discussed in months 5 and 6. And the accumulated total, now likely in the range of $500 to $650, has begun to feel genuinely significant rather than merely symbolic, which itself produces additional motivation as the remaining distance to the $1,000 target begins to feel achievable rather than distant. This is an appropriate phase to consider a further modest increase in the regular percentage allocation, now that the system has proven sustainable across 9 to 10 months of consistent operation. An increase of an additional 2 to 3 percentage points at this stage, building on the increase already implemented in months 3 and 4, can meaningfully accelerate the final approach to the target. The specific principle at this stage is recognizing that the capacity for disciplined saving genuinely increases over time, as the behavioral patterns become more automatic and the lifestyle adjustments required by the percentage allocation become fully normalized rather than representing an ongoing point of friction or sacrifice. Months 11 and 12, the final approach. By this stage, with consistent execution across the preceding 10 months, the accumulated total should be approaching the $1,000 target, likely in the range of $750 to $900, depending on the specific income level, percentages chosen, and any irregular income that emerged along the way. This final phase involves a specific psychological shift that is worth preparing for in advance. As the target becomes genuinely close, there is frequently an unexpected temptation to either accelerate dramatically through drastic, unsustainable measures, or conversely, to relax the discipline slightly, reasoning that the goal is close enough that minor exceptions will not meaningfully affect the outcome. Both of these tendencies should be specifically resisted. The discipline that produced consistent progress across 11 months is precisely the discipline that should complete the journey, rather than abandoning the proven approach at the exact moment it is closest to succeeding. The specific action for this final phase is maintaining exactly the system that has worked, without dramatic acceleration or relaxation, while perhaps identifying the specific date or milestone marker that will represent the moment the $1,000 target is reached, providing a concrete, anticipated finish line for the final weeks of this first major financial achievement. If you are still watching, subscribe right now, because what comes next addresses what happens after you reach this target, the specific decision point that determines whether this first $1,000 becomes the foundation of lasting wealth, or simply gets absorbed back into spending once the initial achievement feels complete. What happens after $1,000? This is the moment that actually determines everything that follows, and it deserves as much attention as the journey to reach it. There is a specific and common failure pattern at exactly this point. Having reached a meaningful savings milestone for the first time, there is often a strong psychological pull to use that accumulated amount for a specific purpose, a celebration, a purchase that has been delayed throughout the saving process, a generous gift to someone else as an expression of the pride felt in having achieved this milestone. I want to be direct about this. Using your first $1,000 for a single significant expenditure, while understandable and not inherently wrong, represents a missed opportunity of substantial significance. If it means returning to zero and restarting the entire 11-month process from the beginning, the specific principle that should guide this moment is treating the first $1,000 not as a destination to be spent upon arrival, but as the foundation layer of an ongoing structure. This means the $1,000, once reached, should transition from a savings target into the base of an actual asset, whether that means becoming the foundation of a second income venture discussed in earlier strategies, becoming an investment in an asset class appropriate to your specific circumstances, or simply remaining intact as a permanent emergency reserve, while a new percentage allocation begins building toward the next meaningful target. Dangote's relationship with his early trading capital followed exactly this principle. The $3,000 borrowed initially did not become a source of personal spending once trading activity began generating returns. It became the permanent foundation that subsequent profits were built upon and reinvested into, growing in scale over years and decades, rather than being treated as a milestone to be consumed once reached. The specific decision to make at the moment your own $1,000 target is reached is whether this amount becomes the permanent foundation of an ongoing wealth-building structure, or whether it becomes a single significant purchase that returns your financial position to exactly where it started 11 months earlier. I am not suggesting the discipline must be absolute and joyless. A modest, planned acknowledgement of this achievement, separate from the accumulated capital itself, serves the important psychological function discussed earlier regarding milestone recognition. But the accumulated $1,000 itself, the actual capital that took 11 months of consistent discipline to build, deserves to become the foundation of something larger rather than the conclusion of the entire effort. What this first $1,000 actually represents, I want to close with something important about what this specific achievement means beyond the number itself. The person who reaches their first $1,000 in genuine, disciplined savings has proven something to themselves that no amount of external encouragement could have proven as convincingly. They have demonstrated, through 11 months of consistent action rather than mere intention, that the system of disciplined financial behavior actually functions for them specifically, in their specific circumstances, with their specific income level. This proof matters enormously for everything that follows. The second $1,000 will be reached more quickly than the first, not primarily because of any change in income or circumstances, but because the behavioral patterns required have become genuinely automatic rather than requiring the ongoing conscious effort that characterized the first journey. The psychological doubt about whether disciplined saving can actually work for someone in your specific situation has been permanently resolved through direct, personal evidence rather than theoretical possibility. This is precisely the foundation Dangote built his entire subsequent career upon. The specific amount of his first meaningful accumulated capital matters far less than what that accumulation proved to him about his own capacity for disciplined, consistent financial behavior over an extended period. Everything that followed in the decades of reinvestment, the eventual scale of industrial enterprise, the accumulated wealth that eventually reached billions, was built upon the same fundamental behavioral pattern first proven through that initial period of disciplined accumulation. You are not simply saving $1,000 over the course of this roadmap. You are proving through direct personal experience rather than borrowed belief that you possess the specific capacity required to build genuine financial security over time. That proof, once established, becomes the foundation for every subsequent financial goal you pursue for the remainder of your life. Start this month. Choose your percentage. Move it the moment your next income arrives, before anything else is spent. Mark your first milestone when you reach it. The journey to your first $1,000 begins with this specific decision, made today, rather than at some future point when circumstances feel more favorable than they do right now. If this roadmap gave you something concrete to follow starting this month, subscribe, because next week we go deeper into exactly how Dangote decided what to do with his first meaningful accumulated capital. The decision that determined everything that followed. See you there.